In a world where royal birthdays are often grand public spectacles filled with ceremony and crowds, one woman chose something entirely different for her 44th year. Behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle, away from cameras and protocol, Catherine would discover that the most precious gifts aren't wrapped in velvet boxes or announced with fanfare. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are found in quiet laughter shared over morning tea, in children's sticky fingers reaching for cake, and in the gentle understanding that passes between two people who have weathered storms together. This is not the story of a princess in a tower, but of a mother, a wife, and a woman who learned that true celebration comes not from what the world expects, but from what the heart truly needs. On this particular January morning, as frost painted the castle windows and family gathered close, Catherine was about to experience a birthday that would remind her why some of life's most beautiful moments happen when nobody else is watching. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Windsor Castle, casting long golden streaks across the ancient stone floors. Catherine stirred in her bed, feeling the familiar weight of another year settling on her shoulders. 44. The number seemed both significant and ordinary, marking another milestone in a life that had been anything but typical. She could hear the distant sounds of the castle coming to life. Footsteps echoed in the corridors, and, somewhere in the kitchens below, the staff would already be preparing for the day ahead. But, for now, in these precious few minutes before the world demanded her attention, Catherine allowed herself to simply be still. The bedroom door creaked open slowly, and she heard the unmistakable sound of small feet trying very hard to be quiet on the hardwood floor. A gentle smile spread across her face as she kept her eyes closed, listening to the whispered conversation happening near the foot of her bed. "Is she awake?" Charlotte's voice was barely audible, but Catherine could picture her daughter's serious expression as she peered toward the bed. "Sho, we have to wait for Papa," George whispered back, his voice carrying the authority of an older brother. "He said we had to wait." "But I want to give her the card now," Louis added, his 4-year-old voice considerably louder than his siblings. "I made it all by myself." Catherine had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. The sound of rustling paper and more urgent shushing followed, and she could imagine the 3 children huddled together, probably clutching homemade cards and small wrapped packages. The bedroom door opened again, this time with more confidence, and she heard William's familiar footsteps crossing the room. She felt the bed dip slightly as he sat down beside her, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "Happy birthday, darling," he said softly, his voice warm with affection. "I believe you have some very eager visitors." Catherine opened her eyes to find William's face close to hers, his expression tender and amused. Behind him, 3 small faces appeared over the edge of the bed, all grinning widely and barely containing their excitement. "Happy birthday, Mama," they chorused, and suddenly, the quiet morning exploded into chaos as all 3 children clambered onto the bed, bringing with them an assortment of handmade gifts and boundless energy. George, now 11 and increasingly conscious of his role as the eldest, presented his card first. It was carefully constructed, with neat handwriting that showed his growing maturity, but the drawing inside was purely childlike, a family of stick figures standing in front of a castle, with a big yellow sun overhead and flowers scattered across a bright green lawn. "I drew all of us," he explained seriously, pointing to each figure. "That's you, Papa, me, Charlotte, Louis, and even Orla." The family's newest addition, their Cocker Spaniel puppy, was represented by a small brown circle with 4 legs and a wagging tail. Charlotte's offering was more elaborate, a folded paper creation that opened up to reveal multiple layers of drawings and messages. Her artistic talents were already evident at 9, with more detailed illustrations and carefully chosen colors. She had written "Best Mama in the World" in her best cursive handwriting and decorated it with tiny hearts and flowers. Louis, not to be outdone by his older siblings, thrust forward a piece of paper that was more glue and glitter than anything else. His drawing was enthusiastic if not entirely recognizable, featuring what appeared to be a very large birthday cake surrounded by colorful scribbles that he proudly announced were all the best things in the world. "This is Orla eating birthday cake," he pointed to one corner where brown and pink had been enthusiastically mixed together. "And this is you being happy, and this is me giving you the biggest hug ever." Catherine felt her heart swell as she admired each creation, taking time to examine every detail and ask questions about the artistic choices. These moments, she knew, were the real treasures of motherhood. Not the public appearances or formal portraits, but these uninhibited expressions of love from her children. William watched the scene with obvious contentment, occasionally catching Catherine's eye over the children's heads with a look that conveyed his own deep satisfaction with their family life. He had learned, perhaps even more than Catherine, to cherish these private family moments. The weight of future responsibility rested heavily on his shoulders, but, here, in this room with his wife and children, he was simply a husband and father. Now, William said after the card presentations were complete, I believe there might be something special waiting downstairs. But, first, shall we let Mama get dressed? Can we help pick out your birthday outfit? Charlotte asked eagerly. She had recently developed a keen interest in fashion and often had opinions about Catherine's clothing choices. I think that's a wonderful idea, Catherine replied, climbing out of bed and wrapping her robe around herself. What do you think would be perfect for a cozy birthday at home? The children immediately began offering suggestions, ranging from Charlotte's practical recommendation of something comfortable but pretty to Louis's enthusiastic vote for the dress with the sparkles. George, ever thoughtful, suggested she wear whatever makes you happy, Mama. As Catherine moved around the room, gathering clothes with input from her enthusiastic styling team, she reflected on how different this birthday felt from previous years. There had been times when her birthday had been marked by official engagements, formal dinners, or public appearances. While she understood and accepted those responsibilities as part of her role, there was something deeply satisfying about spending this particular milestone in such an intimate setting. The children eventually settled on a soft cashmere sweater in a warm cream color, paired with comfortable dark jeans. It was a choice that reflected the day ahead, relaxed but refined, comfortable but still put together. Charlotte declared it perfect for a family birthday, while Louis was slightly disappointed by the lack of sparkles but grudgingly approved. Once dressed, Catherine followed her family out of the bedroom and down the castle's grand corridors. The children raced ahead, their excited chatter echoing off the ancient walls, while William walked beside Catherine, his hand finding hers as they made their way toward what she assumed would be breakfast. But, as they approached the smaller dining room that the family typically used for informal meals, Catherine noticed that the children had stopped and were standing in a neat line, trying to contain their giggles. William squeezed her hand and gestured for her to continue forward. The dining room had been transformed. What was usually a simple family breakfast setting had become something magical. The table was set with their finest china, but in a way that was clearly child-influenced. Fresh flowers from the castle's greenhouse created a centerpiece, but they were arranged in a delightfully haphazard way that suggested small hands had been involved. Balloons and soft pastels were tied to chair backs, and a beautiful birthday cake sat prominently on a side table. But it was the walls that truly showed the children's handiwork. They had been decorated with a timeline of family photos, not the formal portraits that adorned other parts of the castle, but candid shots of family life. Pictures of holidays, first days of school, muddy walks with the dogs, baking disasters in the kitchen, and quiet moments reading together. It was their life together, displayed with love and pride. We wanted to show all the best memories, George explained, his voice slightly shy but pleased with their work. Papa helped us choose the pictures, but we did all the decorating ourselves. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she moved closer to examine the display. Here was Charlotte as a toddler, covered in flour during a baking attempt. There was Louis taking his first steps in the garden, his face bright with triumph. George appeared in multiple photos, from a serious-faced infant to the thoughtful boy he was becoming. And, throughout all of them, the evolution of their family was clear, the love, the laughter, the ordinary extraordinary moments that made up their life together. It's absolutely perfect, Catherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I can't believe you did all this. William stepped up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. They've been planning this for weeks, he said quietly. Every detail was their idea. I was just the assistant. The children beamed at their parents' obvious pleasure, and Louis could no longer contain his excitement. He ran to Catherine and wrapped his arms around her legs, announcing loudly, "This is the best birthday ever, and we haven't even had cake yet." His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon all three children were clamoring for breakfast to begin. They had clearly put as much thought into the meal as they had into the decorations. The menu included all of Catherine's favorites: fresh croissants, seasonal fruit, perfectly scrambled eggs, and the kind of strong English tea that had become her comfort drink over the years. But, beyond the food and decorations, what struck Catherine most was the atmosphere her family had created. There was no rush, no schedule demanding their attention, no outside obligations pulling them in different directions. This was time carved out specifically for being together, for celebrating not just her birthday but their bond as a family. As they settled around the table, the children continued to chatter excitedly about their morning's work, occasionally jumping up to adjust a decoration or point out a particularly favorite photograph. William served the food with theatrical flourishes that made the children giggle, while Catherine found herself simply soaking in the joy and love that filled the room. This was what she had hoped for when she had quietly requested a small, family celebration for her 44th birthday. Not because she didn't appreciate larger gatherings or public recognition, but because these moments, these pure, uncomplicated expressions of family love, were what she treasured most. In a life that was often lived in the public eye, these private celebrations felt like the greatest luxury of all. After breakfast, the family migrated to the comfortable sitting room that had become their favorite gathering space within the castle. Unlike the formal staterooms with their priceless antiques and museum-quality furnishings, this room had been carefully chosen and decorated to feel like a real family home. Oversized sofas invited relaxation, bookshelves held a mixture of classic literature and children's stories, and the coffee table bore the gentle scars of family life, water rings from countless cups of tea and small scratches from years of board games and art projects. The January morning had brought with it a crisp cold that made the room's warmth even more inviting. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls and filling the air with the comforting scent of burning wood. Outside the tall windows, the castle grounds stretched away under a light covering of frost that made every tree and blade of grass sparkle like crystal in the sunlight. Catherine settled into her favorite corner of the large sofa, tucking her feet underneath her in a way that would have made her etiquette instructors cringe but felt perfectly natural in this private family setting. The children immediately arranged themselves around her like puppies seeking warmth, with Louis claiming the spot directly next to her and Charlotte curling up on her other side. George, conscious of his growing independence but still very much a child at heart, chose the ottoman near her feet. William took his place in the armchair across from them, but Catherine could see in his eyes the same contentment she felt. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing their children so relaxed and happy, so secure in the love of their family that they could simply be themselves without worry or pretense. So, William said, settling back in his chair with a warm smile, what would the birthday girl like to do with her special day? The children immediately began offering suggestions, each more enthusiastic than the last. Charlotte proposed a nature walk around the castle grounds, perhaps with a picnic lunch if the weather stayed nice. George suggested they could work on the puzzle they had started weeks ago but never seemed to have time to finish together. Louis, ever practical despite his young age, declared that they should play all the games and eat all the cake and maybe also watch a movie. Catherine laughed at their eagerness to fill every moment with activity. Those all sound wonderful, she said, but I think what I'd like most is just to spend time together. We so rarely get a whole day with no schedule, no appointments, no places we have to be. It was true, and they all knew it. Their lives, while privileged in many ways, were also heavily scheduled and regulated. Every public appearance was planned months in advance, every family outing required security arrangements, and even private time together often had to be carefully coordinated around official duties. To have an entire day with no external obligations felt like an incredible gift. Then, that's exactly what we'll do, William declared. Today is for family, nothing else. Charlotte, always the organizer of the group, had apparently been giving this considerable thought. I think we should start with the puzzle, she announced. We're so close to finishing it, and it's Mama's birthday, so she should get to put in the last piece. The puzzle in question was a 1,000-piece monster depicting a detailed map of the British Isles. It had been a Christmas gift from Catherine's parents, chosen both for its beauty and for its educational value. Over the past few weeks, family members had contributed pieces whenever they had a few spare minutes, but competing schedules had made it impossible to work on it together as a group. They moved to the large table near the windows where the puzzle was spread out, perhaps 3/4 complete. The remaining pieces sat in neat piles, sorted by color and pattern type, a system that Charlotte had implemented and that the rest of the family had learned to respect. Working on the puzzle together had become a kind of meditation for all of them, a quiet activity that allowed for conversation while keeping their hands busy. As they settled around the table, each claiming a section to work on, Catherine marveled at how different her children's approaches to the task were, and how clearly their personalities showed through even in this simple activity. Charlotte worked methodically, examining each piece carefully and testing it in multiple locations before committing to a placement. Her section of the puzzle showed steady, consistent progress. George approached the task with quiet determination, occasionally pausing to study the reference picture on the box before making his next move. He had claimed responsibility for completing the section showing Scotland, and Catherine could see him mentally mapping the geography as he worked. Even at 11, his serious nature and attention to detail were evident. Lewis, true to his energetic personality, grabbed pieces seemingly at random and tried them in various spots with unbridled optimism. His success rate was lower than his siblings, but his enthusiasm never waned, and he celebrated each successful placement with the kind of joy that made everyone else smile. William, Catherine noticed, seemed to be paying more attention to watching their children work than to the puzzle itself. She recognized the expression on his face, the same one she often caught herself wearing when observing their family life. It was a look of deep appreciation for these ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary simply because they were shared. "Mama, I think this piece goes near you," Lewis said, leaning across the table to hand her a bit of blue that looked like it could be part of a lake or perhaps coastal water. "It's the same color as your eyes." The innocent sweetness of the comment made Catherine's heart skip. These were the moments that reminded her why she had fallen so completely in love with motherhood, despite all its challenges and worries. The way children saw the world, making connections and finding beauty in the simplest things, never failed to amaze her. As they worked together, conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic. Charlotte shared news from school, including her excitement about an upcoming science project on marine biology. George talked about the book he was reading, a historical adventure story that had captured his imagination so completely he had been staying up past bedtime to read just one more chapter. Lewis regaled them with detailed accounts of Orla's latest adventures, including the puppy's apparent belief that socks were specifically designed as chew toys. The conversation gradually turned to plans for the coming year. Catherine found herself sharing some of her hopes for new charitable initiatives, while William talked about upcoming travels and the places they hoped to visit as a family. The children chimed in with their own wishes and dreams. Charlotte wanted to learn to ride horses better, George was hoping to start learning a new instrument, and Lewis declared his intention to teach Orla to fetch his slippers like the dogs in his favorite storybook. As the morning stretched into early afternoon, the puzzle began to take its final shape. The satisfaction of seeing the image come together piece by piece created a sense of accomplishment that felt disproportionate to the simple nature of the task, but Catherine understood why. It wasn't really about completing a puzzle, it was about working together toward a common goal, about the patient cooperation and shared focus that had brought them all to this moment. "Look!" Charlotte exclaimed suddenly, pointing to a section where she had just placed several pieces in quick succession. "I think I found where the last few pieces go." Indeed, she had identified the final corner section, and the remaining pieces suddenly seemed to fall into place with satisfying ease. The children worked with renewed energy, passing pieces to whoever was best positioned to place them, calling out discoveries and cheering each successful addition. Finally, only one piece remained. Charlotte, true to her earlier declaration, carefully lifted it and handed it to Catherine. "The birthday girl gets the honor," she said with a small curtsy that made everyone laugh. Catherine held the final piece for a moment, looking around the table at her family's expectant faces. The piece was small and unremarkable, part of the green hills of the countryside, but the moment felt significant nonetheless. As she pressed it into place, completing the beautiful map of their homeland, the children burst into applause and Lewis let out a cheer that probably echoed through half the castle. William came around the table to admire their completed work, putting his arms around Catherine from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Perfect," he said quietly, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the puzzle. The afternoon was still young, and they had hours of unscheduled time stretching ahead of them. But Catherine already felt that this birthday had given her something precious: time with the people she loved most, engaged in the simple pleasure of working together and enjoying each other's company. In a world that often seemed to move too fast and demand too much, these moments of peaceful family connection felt like the greatest gift she could have asked for. As they admired their completed puzzle, Louis tugged on Catherine's sweater. "Now can we have cake?" he asked hopefully, and his timing was so perfect that everyone burst into laughter. Some things, Catherine thought with amusement, never changed, and she was grateful for that constancy in a world where so much else seemed to shift and evolve constantly. The afternoon was still full of possibilities, and the birthday celebration was far from over. But, already, Catherine knew this would be a birthday she would remember not for any grand gestures or expensive gifts, but for the simple joy of being surrounded by the people who knew her best and loved her most completely. The mention of cake seemed to awaken everyone's appetite, and they realized that their focus on the puzzle had carried them well past their usual lunchtime. William suggested they move to the kitchen, an idea that would have been unthinkable in more formal circumstances but felt perfectly natural for this relaxed family day. The castle's kitchen was a fascinating blend of historic architecture and modern convenience. Ancient stone walls and massive wooden beams spoke to centuries of meal preparation, while state-of-the-art appliances and professional-grade equipment reflected the needs of contemporary royal hospitality. But, today, it would serve a much simpler purpose, providing space for a family to prepare and share a meal together. The children had clearly been planning this part of the day as well. Charlotte opened the large refrigerator and began pulling out ingredients with the confidence of someone following a well-rehearsed plan. George retrieved pots and pans from carefully memorized locations, while Louis appointed himself the official taste tester, a role he took very seriously. "We thought we'd make lunch together," Charlotte explained, her cheeks pink with excitement. "Papa taught us how to make your favorite soup last week, and we've been practicing." Catherine's favorite soup was actually quite simple, a creamy tomato basil creation that had comforted her through countless winter afternoons. But watching her children work together to recreate it felt far more special than any elaborate meal prepared by the castle's professional chefs. William rolled up his sleeves and took charge of coordinating the effort, but it was clear that the children had been given specific responsibilities and were proud to demonstrate their newfound culinary skills. Charlotte handled the careful task of chopping fresh basil, her knife work cautious but determined. George took charge of heating the soup base, stirring with serious concentration as he monitored the temperature. Louis, despite his young age, had been trusted with adding measured amounts of cream at just the right moment. The kitchen filled with the warm, comforting aromas of tomatoes, herbs, and cream. But, beyond the sensory pleasure of cooking, Catherine found herself deeply moved by the obvious care her family had put into learning to make something special for her. William caught her eye over the children's heads and smiled, clearly understanding her emotional response to their efforts. "Careful with the heat, George," he guided gently. "Remember, we want it warm but not boiling." "I know, Papa," George replied seriously, but without any impatience at the reminder. "Charlotte, is the basil ready?" The coordination between the siblings was impressive, Catherine thought. They had clearly practiced this meal preparation, probably multiple times, to achieve this level of comfortable collaboration. She could picture them working together in the kitchen over the past few weeks, William patiently teaching and guiding while they perfected their technique. As the soup simmered, William suggested they prepare the accompaniments. Fresh bread appeared from the pantry, along with a selection of cheeses and the kind of simple salad ingredients that would complement their main dish perfectly. Again, the children seemed to know exactly what to do, moving around each other in the kitchen with surprising efficiency. Louis appointed himself the bread warmer, a task that mainly involved opening and closing the oven door to check on the rolls heating inside, but which he approached with utmost seriousness. Charlotte arranged cheese and crackers on a wooden board with an artistic eye that reminded Catherine of her mother-in-law's talent for making even simple presentations look elegant. George carefully washed lettuce leaves for their salad, his movements deliberate and precise. The birthday cake sat on the counter nearby, drawing occasional glances from all the children. It was clearly homemade, decorated with slightly uneven pink and white frosting that bore the unmistakable marks of being created with love rather than professional skill. The number 44 had been piped on top in chocolate, and small sugar flowers were scattered around the edges. "We made the cake yesterday," Charlotte confided as she worked. "Louis wanted to put sprinkles on everything, but we convinced him that flowers were more elegant." "I still think sprinkles would have been better," Louis declared loyally, but without any real disappointment. "But the flowers are pretty too." Catherine had to suppress a laugh at the diplomatic way Charlotte had handled her younger brother's decorating preferences. At 9 years old, she was already showing the kind of tactful leadership that would serve her well in the years to come. The soup was finally declared ready, and they gathered around the kitchen's large wooden table, a massive piece of furniture that had probably served countless castle inhabitants over the centuries. Unlike the formal dining room where they had shared breakfast, the kitchen setting felt completely informal and relaxed. They could have eaten in any number of more elegant locations throughout the castle, but this felt right for the kind of intimate family celebration they were creating. William ladled the soup into bowls while the children proudly pointed out their individual contributions to the meal. The soup was delicious, perhaps not quite as refined as the version the professional chefs might have prepared, but infinitely more meaningful because of the hands that had made it. "This is absolutely perfect," Catherine said after her first spoonful, and meant it completely. The flavors were well balanced, the temperature just right, and the pride on her children's faces made every bite even better. Conversation during lunch was relaxed and wide-ranging. They talked about favorite family recipes, upcoming events they were looking forward to, and the children's various interests and activities. Louis entertained them with an elaborate story about Orla's morning adventures, complete with dramatic reenactments of the puppy's encounters with various castle inhabitants. George shared his thoughts on a book he had been reading about British naval history, his enthusiasm for the subject evident as he described famous battles and ships. Catherine and William exchanged amused glances at their son's growing sophistication, but also genuine interest in his observations and questions. Charlotte talked about her art classes and her latest project, a watercolor painting of the castle gardens that she was creating as a surprise gift for her grandparents. Her artistic talents were developing rapidly, and she spoke about techniques and color choices with the kind of serious consideration that suggested a real passion for the medium. As they finished their soup and moved on to the bread and cheese, Catherine reflected on how different this meal felt from their usual family dinners. Without the pressure of schedules or the formality that often accompanied their meals, conversation flowed more naturally, and she felt she was seeing new sides of her children's personalities. William seemed to be having similar thoughts. "We should do this more often," he said, reaching for Catherine's hand across the table. "Just us, no schedules, no obligations." "Can we cook dinner too?" Louis asked hopefully. "I know how to make scrambled eggs really well." "We could have a picnic dinner in the sitting room," Charlotte suggested. "With blankets on the floor and everything." George nodded enthusiastically. "Like camping, but inside where it's warm." The idea appealed to all of them, and plans began to form for an indoor picnic later in the evening. They would gather simple foods, spread blankets in front of the fireplace, and eat while watching a family-friendly movie. It would be the perfect end to a perfectly imperfect, wonderfully ordinary family birthday. As they cleared their lunch dishes together, working as a team just as they had while cooking, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for this day and for her family. The elaborate birthday celebrations she had attended in the past had their place and their purpose, but this intimate gathering felt more authentic, more true to who she was as a person rather than who she was as a public figure. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities. The children were already discussing what they might do next, perhaps a walk in the gardens if the weather held, or maybe some reading time together by the fire. Catherine found herself hoping that time would slow down, allowing her to savor every moment of this special day. The birthday cake still waited for them, promising sweetness to come. But already, Catherine felt that this celebration had given her something sweeter than any dessert, the gift of unhurried time with the people she loved most, the joy of being celebrated not for her role or position, but simply for being herself, a mother and wife who was treasured by her family for reasons that had nothing to do with titles or duties and everything to do with love. After lunch, the family decided to venture outside for a walk around the castle grounds. The January air was crisp and invigorating, with that particular quality of winter light that made everything appear especially clear and bright. Frost still clung to the grass in shadowy areas, creating patches of silver that crunched satisfyingly underfoot. The children bundled up in their warmest coats, hats, and gloves, transforming from the relaxed family members who had shared lunch into small explorers ready for adventure. Louis wrapped a bright red scarf around his neck with such enthusiasm that he nearly disappeared beneath the woolly folds, while Charlotte carefully adjusted her gloves to ensure her fingers stayed warm enough for any nature discovery she might want to examine closely. Orla, the family's cocker spaniel puppy, appeared as if summoned by the sound of the door opening, her tail wagging furiously and her entire body practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of a family walk. At 8 months old, she was all energy and enthusiasm, her golden coat gleaming in the winter sunlight as she bounded through the frost-covered grass. The castle gardens in winter had their own special beauty. The formal flower beds lay dormant beneath protective mulch, but the underlying structure of the landscape design was more visible without the abundance of summer blooms. Ancient trees stood like sculptural sentinels, their bare branches creating intricate patterns against the pale sky. The topiary gardens showed their architectural bones, the carefully shaped hedges maintaining their form even in the dormant season. William fell into step beside Catherine as they followed the children and Orla along the familiar paths. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining through warm gloves. This simple gesture of connection, so automatic and unthinking, represented years of shared experiences and understanding. "Penny for your thoughts," William said quietly, his breath creating small puffs of vapor in the cold air. Catherine considered how to put her feelings into words. "I was just thinking about how perfect this feels," she said eventually. "Not perfect in a polished, public way, but perfect in the sense of being exactly what I needed without even knowing I needed it." She gestured toward their children, who had discovered a section of the garden where the groundskeepers had been working. George was examining the careful pruning work on a large rose bush, asking questions about the timing and technique. Charlotte had found interesting seed pods that she was collecting for some future art project. Louis was engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with Orla about the proper way to investigate interesting smells. "They've given me something today that I couldn't have asked for because I didn't even realize how much I was missing it," Catherine continued. "Time to just be a family, without any of the external pressures or expectations. Time to remember who we are when it's just us." William squeezed her hand gently. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking the same thing. We get so caught up in the responsibilities and obligations, all of which are important, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I think we forget that our most important role is just being parents to these 3 amazing children." They paused to watch as Louis attempted to teach Orla to sit still long enough for him to place a small stick on her nose. The puppy was clearly game for any activity that involved attention from her favorite 4-year-old human, but her understanding of the game's rules was somewhat limited. Each attempt dissolved into giggles from Louis and enthusiastic tail wagging from Orla. Charlotte had moved on from seed collecting to photographing interesting textures with a child-friendly camera that had been a recent gift. She approached her subject matter with artistic seriousness, crouching down to get the perfect angle on frost patterns or the intricate bark of an old oak tree. Her eye for composition was already quite sophisticated, and Catherine could see real artistic potential developing. George had found a partially frozen pond and was carefully testing the ice with a stick, his scientific curiosity evident in his methodical approach to understanding the thickness and formation patterns. He called his siblings over to observe his findings, naturally taking on the role of teacher as he explained what he was discovering. "Look at this, Charlotte. You can see how the ice formed in layers. See these bubbles trapped here? I think they got caught when the temperature dropped quickly last night." Charlotte dutifully examined his discovery, while Louis was more interested in whether the ice would support the weight of a small stone. His experimental methodology was less sophisticated than his older brother's, but his enthusiasm was equally genuine. The family continued their walk, following paths that took them past the vegetable gardens where winter crops still grew under protective covers, around the orchard where bare fruit trees stood in neat rows, and along the edge of the small wood that provided a natural boundary to the formal gardens. In the wood, they discovered evidence of winter wildlife, tracks in the soft earth where rabbits and deer had passed through, and the occasional flash of color as winter birds moved among the branches. Louis was particularly excited by a red squirrel that watched them curiously from high in a pine tree, chattering at them in what he interpreted as a greeting. "I think he's saying happy birthday to Mama," Louis declared confidently, and proceeded to have what appeared to be a detailed conversation with the squirrel, providing both sides of the dialogue with impressive creativity. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something about being outdoors, moving through the natural world with her family, that seemed to strip away all the complexities of their daily lives and reduce everything to its most essential elements: the pleasure of being together, the simple joy of discovery and exploration, the satisfaction of sharing experiences with people she loved. William pointed out various features of the landscape, sharing stories about the garden's history and his own childhood memories of exploring these same paths. His knowledge of the grounds was both practical and personal. He knew which trees had been planted by his grandfather, which garden beds had been his grandmother's particular pride, and which secret corners had been his own favorite hiding places as a boy. The children absorbed these stories with fascination, understanding that they were not just learning about the landscape but about their family's connection to this place. George asked thoughtful questions about the practical aspects of garden management, while Charlotte was more interested in the artistic and aesthetic choices that had shaped the design over generations. Louis, true to form, wanted to know if there were any hidden treasures buried anywhere and whether pirates had ever visited the castle. As they completed their circuit of the gardens and began heading back toward the castle, the afternoon light was starting to change, taking on the golden quality that comes in the hours before sunset. The temperature was dropping slightly, and Catherine could see that the children were beginning to feel the cold despite their warm clothing. "Hot chocolate when we get inside?" William suggested, and was met with enthusiastic approval from all three children. The prospect of warmth and treats provided extra motivation for the final stretch of their walk. Orla seemed to sense that the adventure was winding down and made the most of her remaining outdoor time, racing in wide circles around the family and occasionally stopping to roll in patches of frost-covered grass with evident delight. As they approached the castle's entrance, Catherine took one last look back at the gardens they had explored. In a few hours, this perfect family day would become a memory, but she knew it would be one she would treasure always. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because everything ordinary had been made special by the love and attention her family had brought to it. The simple act of walking together, observing the natural world, sharing stories and laughter, these were the moments that made up the true substance of family life. Tomorrow would bring back the scheduled obligations and public responsibilities, but today had reminded her of what really mattered and what she was ultimately working to protect and preserve. As they stepped inside, leaving the cold behind and anticipating the warmth and comfort that awaited them, Catherine felt deeply grateful for this birthday gift her family had given her, not any physical present, but the gift of time and attention, of being seen and celebrated for who she truly was rather than who the world expected her to be. The promised hot chocolate proved to be another family production, with everyone contributing to the preparation in the warm kitchen that had already seen so much family activity throughout the day. William took charge of heating milk while Charlotte measured cocoa powder with scientific precision. George was responsible for the whipped cream, a task he approached with the kind of focused concentration usually reserved for much more serious endeavors. Louis, armed with a small whisk and tremendous enthusiasm, was put in charge of stirring the mixture in his own special cup. The kitchen filled with the rich, comforting aroma of chocolate and the sounds of family teamwork. Orla positioned herself strategically near the stove, her hopeful expression suggesting she believed hot chocolate preparation might somehow result in treats for four-legged family members as well. As they worked together, Catherine noticed how naturally the children had fallen into collaborative rhythms throughout the day. Each activity had brought out different aspects of their personalities and different combinations of their individual strengths. George's methodical approach balanced Charlotte's creative instincts, while Louis's unbridled enthusiasm kept everyone smiling and prevented any task from becoming too serious. The hot chocolate was pronounced perfect by unanimous vote, and they carried their steaming mugs back to the sitting room where the fire still crackled warmly. The contrast between the cold they had left outside and the cozy warmth indoors made the room feel even more welcoming than usual. Charlotte had an announcement to make. "Before we have cake," she said with the kind of ceremonial gravity that 9-year-old girls could bring to important moments, "we have presents for Mama." Catherine had wondered when gifts might appear, but she had been so absorbed in the day's activities that she had almost forgotten about them entirely. The homemade cards from the morning had felt like presents enough, along with the carefully prepared meals and the obvious love and effort her family had put into every detail of the day. George disappeared briefly and returned carrying a carefully wrapped package that was clearly a book. His serious expression suggested this was a gift he had chosen with considerable thought. Catherine unwrapped it to discover a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages thick and creamy, the kind of notebook that invited careful thoughts and important reflections. "Papa said you sometimes like to write down your thoughts," George explained, his cheeks slightly pink with the self-consciousness that came with gift-giving. "I thought maybe you'd like somewhere special to keep them. The lady at the shop said the paper is good for fountain pens too." Catherine was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the insight it showed into her private habits. She did indeed keep journals, finding that writing helped her process the complexities of her life and responsibilities. That George had noticed this, and had chosen something to support this quiet practice, showed a level of observation and consideration that moved her deeply. Charlotte's gift was next, and it proved to be something she had clearly made herself. It was a small wooden box, decorated with painted flowers in Catherine's favorite colors. The craftsmanship was careful if not perfect, and the love that had gone into its creation was evident in every brush stroke. "It's for your jewelry," Charlotte explained, "or maybe special keepsakes. I made it in art class, but I painted it at home so it could be exactly how I wanted it for you." Inside the box, Catherine discovered a small piece of paper with Charlotte's handwriting, "For Mama, who makes everything beautiful." The simple message hit her with unexpected emotional force. That her daughter saw her as someone who brought beauty into the world felt like the highest compliment she could have received. Louis's gift was the most dramatically presented, involving considerable ceremony as he retrieved a package that was wrapped with more tape than paper and decorated with his signature artistic enthusiasm. Inside, Catherine found a collection of his artwork from recent months, drawings of the family, pictures of Orla in various adventures, and several attempts at writing her name in his developing handwriting. But the centerpiece of his collection was a drawing that made Catherine's heart skip. It showed a woman with long brown hair wearing a crown, clearly meant to be her, surrounded by three smaller figures and a dog. Above the family group, Louis had drawn a large yellow sun with an enormous smile, and across the top of the page, he had written "My mama is the best mama" in letters that wandered enthusiastically across the paper. "I drew all my favorite pictures of you," Louis announced proudly. "Papa helped me pick the best ones, and Charlotte helped me put them in order." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked through the collection. These were not professionally executed artworks, but they were priceless documents of how her youngest child saw her and their family. The love and admiration evident in every crayon stroke meant more to her than any expensive gift could have. William's gift was last, and he presented it with a smile that suggested he was particularly pleased with his choice. The package was small and elegantly wrapped, and Catherine's first thought was that it might be jewelry. But when she opened it, she found something much more personal and meaningful. It was a small, leather-bound photo album, handcrafted and clearly made to order. Inside, William had assembled a collection of family photos that spanned their years together, not the formal portraits that were widely seen, but intimate family moments captured over the years. There were pictures of the children as babies, family holidays, quiet moments at home, and candid shots that showed the evolution of their relationship and their growing family. Each photo was mounted carefully, and William had written small captions in his own handwriting, dates, locations, and sometimes small memories associated with each image. It was a chronicle of their life together, told through moments of joy, growth, and love. "I wanted to create something that was just ours," William said quietly as Catherine turned the pages. "Something that captured all the reasons why every day with you and our family feels like a gift." The final page of the album was dedicated to photos from recent months, including several Catherine had never seen before, pictures William had apparently taken without her noticing during quiet family moments. There was one of her reading to Louis before bedtime, another of her helping Charlotte with homework, and one that showed her laughing at something George had said during a family dinner. Seeing herself through William's eyes, captured in these unguarded moments of motherhood and family life, felt like seeing a version of herself she rarely had the opportunity to observe. She looked happy in these photos, relaxed and natural, fully present in the moments being captured. "This is perfect," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of these gifts are perfect." The children beamed at her obvious pleasure, and Louis clapped his hands with satisfaction. "Now can we have birthday cake?" he asked, and his timing was so perfect that everyone burst into laughter. The cake ceremony proved to be just as special as everything else about the day. The slightly imperfect homemade cake was lit with 44 candles, a number that had seemed daunting in the morning but now felt like a celebration of all the experiences and growth those years had brought. As Catherine made her wish before blowing out the candles, she found herself hoping not for anything new or different, but for more days like this one. More opportunities to be fully present with her family, more chances to see the world through her children's eyes, more moments of simple connection and joy. The cake was delicious, moist and sweet with just the right amount of frosting. But, beyond its taste, it represented all the love and effort her family had put into making this day special. Every slightly uneven layer and imperfectly piped flower spoke to the care that had gone into its creation. As evening approached, they implemented their earlier plan for an indoor picnic dinner. Blankets were spread in front of the fireplace, simple foods were arranged on plates, and they settled down together to share a meal unlike any they had ever had in the formal grandeur of the castle. Louis declared it the best restaurant ever and appointed himself the entertainment director, telling stories and asking everyone to share their favorite parts of the day. Charlotte contributed by creating napkin art and arranging their simple meal with artistic flair. George, in his thoughtful way, reflected on the day's activities and expressed appreciation for the chance to spend uninterrupted time together as a family. As the fire burned lower and the children began to show signs of the satisfying exhaustion that comes from a full day of family activities, Catherine reflected on what her 44th birthday had taught her. In a life that often felt complicated by obligations and expectations, this day had reminded her of the fundamental simplicity of what truly mattered, the love of family, the joy of being present in the moment, and the deep satisfaction that came from being seen and appreciated for who she truly was. The gifts she had received were precious not because of their material value, but because they represented her family's understanding of her as a person. The journal acknowledged her reflective nature, the decorated box celebrated her appreciation for beauty, the artwork showed her through her youngest child's loving eyes, and the photo album captured the memories that formed the foundation of their shared life. As William helped the sleepy children prepare for bed, Catherine remained by the fire for a few minutes, holding the photo album and looking through its pages once more. Tomorrow would bring back the usual routines and responsibilities, but this day had given her something to carry forward, a renewed appreciation for the ordinary extraordinary moments that made up the heart of family life. She thought about the wish she had made before blowing out her birthday candles. More than any material thing, what she had wished for was the wisdom to recognize and treasure these perfect imperfect moments when they occurred. This birthday had been a gift not just from her family to her, but from the present moment to her memory, creating a day she would carry with her as a reminder of what true celebration looked like when it grew from love rather than obligation. The 44 candles had been blown out, but their light seemed to linger in the warmth of the room, the satisfaction of a day well spent, and the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who mattered most.